Thank you for joining us for this special edition of KPBS News. I'm Maya Trabulsi. During this newscast, we are showcasing a week of KPBS reporting on the COVID-19 pandemic and the protests demanding change to how we police our communities. First up, we hear from the local grandmother injured by police during that violent night in La Mesa. She's out of the hospital and on Wednesday spoke publicly for the first time. Here's KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman.
I'm very, very weak.
Leslie Furcron was hit in the face with a beanbag round by La Mesa police at a protest nearly 2 weeks ago.
And I never had came out here that night for this to be a part of my story.
The 59-year-old La Mesa resident spent a week in the intensive care unit and says she's thankful to be alive.
First and foremost, I need to just thank God for still being here.
Her attorney says her skull was fractured and she can't see out of her left eye. They're planning to sue for medical costs.
There is no reason why Ms. Furcron should have to shoulder the burden of these injuries of no fault of her own by herself.
Recounting the night of the incident, Furcron's attorney says while protesting she threw a can on the ground.
She had just called the police murderers. She said, "You guys are murderers." And then subsequent to that, in the video, you can hear the shot and then you can see the impact.
La Mesa police officials say Furcron threw something at deputies before the beanbag round was fired at her from about 40 yards out. Furcron's attorney calls it retaliation and wants the officer who shot the round identified.
Asking that this name be released so that we can all be involved in this investigation, because this type of force is just not appropriate.
In an interview with KPBS, La Mesa Police Chief Walt Vasquez said they have identified the officer who fired the beanbag round, but are not releasing his name.
Eventually, per the Senate Bill 1421, that information will be released, including the video. But at this time, the officer's name will not be released.
Vasquez did say the officer is not in the field, but Furcron's attorney argues LMPD is hiding information.
All we have is La Mesa Police Department holding all the cards and not showing them to anyone.
Today, the La Mesa police chief issued a statement saying, in part, he wishes Ms. Furcron a full recovery and is promising an investigation into this unfortunate incident. Just yesterday, the La Mesa City Council voted unanimously to review everything that happened during the protests. The city is also working on a new budget, and at its next meeting, council members want to see a full breakdown of the police department's expenses. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
These nationwide protests have called on cities to defund police departments and reallocate money toward proactive community programs. The San Diego City Council had that opportunity this week, but chose not to do so. Instead, the council approved a budget that increases funding for the police department by 5% to more than $566 million. The vote came after 10 hours of public comment, mostly from people asking for reduced funding. Councilwoman Monica Montgomery says efforts at reform will continue. Councilman Chris Ward was the only one to vote no.
We have been poring over this budget and trying to do the best that we possibly can, which with as much support as we possibly have, to make a better city and take this opportunity during this time.
I would like to have seen a reallocation of resources from police towards program policies and initiatives that support this work, because we need to be investing more in our people, proactive measures, and less in reactive measures.
Councilman Ward's no vote had less to do with policing than efforts to deal with the fallout from COVID-19. He wanted the budget to include more money for low-income renters who have been impacted by the pandemic. After the budget vote, dozens protested loudly but peacefully outside the home of Mayor Kevin Faulconer. There's a new push for a de-escalation policy at the San Diego Police Department, but as KPBS investigative reporter Claire Trekisser explains, many attitudes and procedures among local police are deeply ingrained.
All right, so during the presentation, it's about a 2-hour presentation that I condensed to about half an hour.
The vast majority of the countless interactions police officers have with the public are peaceful and end without incident. On a community outreach day last August, San Diego police officer and use of force expert Ken Kreese spent time talking about the positive encounters. But he also talked about when things get confrontational and people blame police.
If you just did what I told you to do, We won't have any issues. I won't be wearing anything on my belt. Everyone agree? What's happened to our society? What's happened to our society? The one that I grew up in, man, my dad told me to do something, I better do it.
Crees goes on to make several comments like this during the presentation.
Right? Put your hands on the steering wheel because officers want to see your hands. You don't start digging under your seat. Hang on, officer. Right?
His point seems to be that if people didn't resist arrests, police wouldn't have to use force.
What happened? When did these officers become the suspect and the suspect became the victim? When did that happen? When did these officers become the suspect and the suspect became the victim? When did that happen?
That put fear in my heart for my sons. What happened to our society? Does he understand that people have had different historical, how we've been dealt with in this country has been different? Does he understand that everyone has not had the same experience as a white male growing up in the United States?
Layla Aziz wasn't at the event, but we showed her the video. The community activist from Southeast San Diego says the attitude Crees is displaying is a big reason why there is so much fear and mistrust of police in the neighborhood she serves.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
With massive protests against police violence on people of color, local law enforcement agencies are vowing reform. Departments across the county have agreed to end the use of the chokehold and are requiring at least 4 hours of de-escalation training to comply with a new state law. But District Attorney Summer Stephan says only 700 officers of 5,000 countywide have been trained so far. Aziz and others welcome the de-escalation training, but say it isn't enough. They want departments to completely overhaul how officers are hired and trained. And so far, that isn't on the table.
So ideally, we always try to test people's compliance verbally.
Here's Sergeant Michael Bell's last August. He's the in-service training manager at the San Diego Police Academy and was explaining the department's use of force procedures.
If they are punching at me or striking me or kicking me, I may respond in a similar fashion, or if they're assaulting, I may even go up to the level of a baton to overcome that resistance.
We asked what limits police officers might have on how much force they can use.
So we don't normally put limits on the type of force or the number of times someone will be struck because it's all based on the suspect's resistance.
Police officers are used to literally barking out commands and having people follow the directions.
Philip Stinson studied policing across the country and says officers have to change how they interact with people on the street.
If simply the police officers would take the opportunity to step back and explain why they're taking actions, why they're doing what they're doing, and why it's necessary to do so, I think you'll find that people generally are more compliant than if officers are simply barking out commands at people.
They right here, bro. Hey, bro, you can't do that.
Body cam and cell phone videos increased criticism of police.
All you're going to see is about 100 videos this year of what? Officers on top of somebody, hitting somebody, and then they play it like we do that 99% of the time.
The videos frustrate Crees and other officers because they represent a tiny fraction of their day-to-day actions.
Mine never made the news when a guy tried to draw a gun on me and shoot me and my partner. And when I asked him off the record, were you going to try to kill me? He looked at me and put his head down, refused to answer. He answered the question, didn't he? That never made the news. You know, that happens quite often.
We have to work hard to get rid of the ones that are causing the problem.
Assemblywoman Shirley Weber has helped bring about different types of police reform, including the requirement that all officers have de-escalation training. But she says this is a small part of a large culture shift that is needed.
If you eliminate those one or two, then you start changing people's perception of behavior. That's number one. And then if you start as a part of your recruitment to bring in different kinds of officers from the beginning and give them the support they need to change the culture, then you at least begin the process. And it may not be as long as we think.
Claire Tregesser, KPBS News.
That's one of a three-part series on police use of force in San Diego, and we have all of our stories posted right now at kpbs.org. Demonstrations continued across San Diego County this week. In the South Bay, Imperial Beach Mayor Serge Dedina is demanding an investigation into a violent assault. The incident happened Sunday during a peaceful protest near Pier Plaza. Marcus Boyd was documenting the event when a man in a red t-shirt and dark shorts walked up behind Boyd and punched him in the head. The attacker ran away. Sheriff's officials say they interviewed a suspect but have not made an arrest. Another protest is planned for Imperial Beach this weekend. And demonstrators marched this week in Santee to boost the city's reputation after a string of ugly incidents. In recent weeks, a man was seen shopping in a KKK-style hood, and a couple was seen with swastikas on their face masks. KPBS reporter Taryn Mento has the story.
The first march, early in the afternoon, kicked off with the Cupid Shuffle dance near West Hills Park. Santee resident and 23-year-old Alana Etheridge was one of the organizers.
The stigma of Santee being racist, if that narrative is going to keep going, we're going to lose the diversity that we're starting to grow in Santee. Exactly. So we're just trying to make sure the Black lives of Santee feel loved.
Later, a few miles away, hundreds more people walked down a main road to the local sheriff's station. The group of what could have been more than 1,000 heard from coordinators.
All love out here, no fear.
And 83-year-old Richard Lawrence. He walked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. during the 1965 march in Selma, Alabama.
That the tide has turned in this country, and if we stay on our feet and stay alive, we will see to it that the tide stays out on injustice.
They left flowers at the sheriff's station and honored George Floyd with 9 minutes of silence. That's how long a Minneapolis officer held his knee on Floyd's neck. They then marched back to their starting point, but later, sheriff's deputies raced to a Target store along the group's route where the demonstrators had encountered an opposing group. All eventually left, and a sheriff's watch commander said no arrests were made. Taryn Mento, KPBS News.
An outgrowth of the protests is a call to remove statues that depict historical figures with ties to racism and violence. And that prompted the city of Chula Vista to take action. Friday morning, the city announced it removed a statue of Christopher Columbus at Discovery Park. It's been there since 1991. The city says it was removed out of public safety concerns and put in storage. A demonstration was planned to be held at the park on Friday afternoon. The Columbus statue has been targeted by vandals in the past. In February, the Chula Vista Human Relations Commission approved a plan to formally ask the City Council to remove the statue. KPBS will continue to follow the protests and the changes they are bringing. We have a section at kpbs.org with all of our stories. Click on the George Floyd protests link on our homepage. Now to what's been a week of progress when it comes to COVID-19, with more parts of San Diego reopening to the public. As for the numbers, San Diego County is approaching 9,000 cases since February. This week, local deaths surpassed 300. Bars, gyms, hotels, and movie theaters were allowed to reopen on Friday. Balboa Park also reopened this week, along with boardwalks and piers at local beaches. More now from KPBS reporter John Carroll.
The warmest day so far of 2020, a perfect day to hit the beach or to enjoy the now reopened pier at Ocean Beach. And that's just what thousands of people did on this Tuesday.
I just have felt housebound so long, I can't wait to get out. It was wonderful today.
Sue Harris, along with her friend and her son, were enjoying the now officially open boardwalk at Mission Beach. She had her mask with her, but she wasn't wearing it.
Out in the fresh air, I just can't believe anything could live through this ocean water.
Joanne Garcia-Polo does not think the threat posed by COVID-19 is overblown. She and her friend were wearing their masks. But like Sue Harris, they were enjoying the day too.
To be honest, tomorrow my sister-in-law and I are going to come out and do a bike ride along the bay that I miss so much. I used to come out on a weekly basis, and looking forward to that a lot.
But this day is about more than the ability to enjoy sand, surf, boardwalk, and the ability to park all at once. It's also a very good day for local business. Kojak's owner Mike Sultan was able to keep his business, even though he says he felt like he was drowning over the last several weeks. Now he's hopeful.
I think we can make it finally, with this opening. A lot of stuff for the parking lot, the boardwalk, everything.
But the EMS medical director for San Diego Fire and Rescue says everyone should remember the virus is still here and it's still spreading.
But we know that viruses often come in waves. And the fact that we're reopening right now doesn't necessarily mean that everything's all better.
On Friday, we'll take another big step in the reopening process with gyms, hotels, bars and wineries, museums, galleries, the zoo, and aquariums, among other places. John Carroll, KPBS News.
San Diego State University is giving more detail on what students and staff can expect for fall semester. The CSU system has allowed the university's Flex Plan. It will be a mix of in-person and remote classes. Larger lectures and discussions are likely to be moved to online. Campus life will also adjust to allow for social distancing. Residence halls will operate at 50% capacity with preference given to non-local students. And this was the final week of classes for San Diego Unified and other schools. Now the focus is on whether things can return to normal for the fall. KPBS education reporter Joe Hong explains how it would work.
Earlier this week, California State Superintendent Tony Thurmond released a 50-page handbook on safely reopening schools. But he emphasized that it'll be up to individual districts to decide when and how students are allowed back on campuses.
School reopening is a matter that is decided locally. With 1,000 school districts in our state, all of our schools makes their own decision about when they might open according to their own calendar.
Officials in San Diego County District say they're still in the early stages of developing plans for the new school year, but some details are emerging. Under the state guidance, students will have their temperatures checked regularly. Students will need to be separated by 6 feet in the classroom. Students and teachers will be required to wear face coverings. In Chula Vista's elementary schools, teachers will wear face shields instead of masks.
Especially in elementary school age, kids need to see the teacher.
Francisco Escovedo is the superintendent of the Chula Vista Elementary School District. The district was supposed to start its school year on July 20th, but it pushed back its start date to August 31st to meet health guidelines for safe reopening.
So think about hand sanitizer, making sure it's filled up every day, and making sure we have enough stations dispersed throughout the school so it's readily available.
The state's guidance offers several possible scenarios. Schools could divide its student body in half and have them come to campus on alternating weeks. Some schools might do half days. Escovedo says the district surveyed parents and about 80% wanted their students to return to campuses to some degree. But distance learning will be an option for students who might be living with at-risk family members.
So everyone has a different rationale and specific reasons why they want to stay or go to school. So we definitely want to meet the needs of our individual families.
But returning students to school is a top priority for San Diego Unified School District, which is the second largest district in the state.
We desperately want to bring our students back onto our campuses in the fall.
Richard Barrera is the vice president of San Diego Unified School Board.
We don't want to do staggered schedules. We don't want to do half days. Our students need to be in school all day. Our parents need our students to be in school all day.
But to do that, Barrera says districts will need more federal and state funding than has already been promised. Otherwise, it'll be back to distance learning. Joe Hong, KPBS News.
The finances of every city in San Diego County have been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. But KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen says as cities vote on their budgets this month, some are clearly hurting more than others.
Things have been quieter than usual lately at the National City Mile of Cars. It's one of the oldest car shopping districts in the country, but the pandemic has kept many would-be shoppers in their homes, and the cratering economy has led consumers to put off big-ticket purchases. All that is dealing a major blow to the National City budget.
I keep saying, how do we drive down the hill versus off the cliff?
Brad Ralston is the National City manager.
Off the cliff to me is hurting people, employees, dealing with layoffs and those sorts of things.
Instead of those drastic actions, Ralston wants to balance the budget for the next fiscal year with mostly short-term measures, things like deferring infrastructure projects and dipping into the city's reserves. National City was hit harder than most by the pandemic because it gets about 55% of its general fund revenues from sales tax, more than any other city in San Diego County. On top of the mile of cars,
you have one of the large regional malls in Plaza Bonita, Westfield Plaza Bonita, all of which, contribute to, the good and the bad of having a lot of sales tax. So the good, of course, is you need the revenues. The bad is when you have recessions, it tends to be more volatile than property tax and some of the other taxes that support local government.
The city budget is a balancing act.
Nick Romo is a legislative representative for the California League of Cities. He says cities face a collective loss of about $7 billion through summer 2021 because of the pandemic. Much of that is in sales tax revenues.
Different from the last recession, usually sales taxes are still can be a reliable source of revenue, but these are extraordinary times with the social distancing, the stay-at-home orders. That have really prevented all of us from being able to at least go down to the corner store and purchase something. So that has been a unique point of this crisis.
The one source of revenue where cities are seeing stability or even growth is in property taxes. But Romo says California's Prop 13 significantly limits year-to-year growth in property tax revenue. This makes it tough for cities, even in good times, to find ways to pay for basic services like public safety, parks, and libraries.
If they're going to grow, if they're going to continue to serve residents, more and more residents at great, with great service, they've had to turn to other sources of revenue, including the sales taxes and other hotel taxes.
Hotel taxes are another big revenue source for San Diego cities, but they've also dried up over the past 4 months as tourism has come to a standstill. After the city of San Diego, the county's second biggest generator of hotel taxes is Carlsbad. Its hotels are suffering, but the city's valuable real estate and its relatively wealthy population have allowed Carlsbad to build up one of the most robust rainy day funds in the county, more than $100 million.
I do think that the city of Carlsbad's actually positioned likely better than most in the region.
Scott Chadwick is the Carlsbad city manager. He says the city took advantage of the healthy economy before the pandemic to pay down a sizable chunk of its pension debt.
I believe it was roughly $20 million that we paid down of our pension liability last year. And that was on top of a pay down of, I believe it was $11 million the year before. So we are aggressively trying to address our pension. And again, I feel that we've well positioned ourselves to be able to weather the storm.
But to the east, in Escovedo, the budget situation was dire even before COVID-19. City Manager Jeff Epp says he's planning on asking voters for a 1-cent sales tax increase in the November election.
The difficulty is that our revenue situation just doesn't match up with the expenditures that are necessary to run a city of this size. And it really does need voter attention. We've been able to deal with it internally for several years, but we simply can't keep doing that. And we can't keep doing that, particularly now with the effects of the global pandemic.
Of course, tax hikes typically don't fare well on the ballot in times of economic hardship. And depending on how long the pandemic lasts and the speed of the economic recovery, 2020 could be just the start of cities' financial struggles. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
One of Southern California's biggest tourist attractions has a plan to reopen. Disneyland and Disney California are working to reopen both Anaheim parks on July 17th. Downtown Disney, a popular shopping center, would reopen on July 9th. Reservations will be required and capacity will be limited. Some Disneyland events such as parades and nighttime shows will not immediately return. The San Diego Zoo is reopening 1 week from Saturday on June 20th. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson says the facility will welcome members and donors for select access before the general public is allowed inside.
San Diego Zoo officials say they had been thinking about reopening even before they were ordered to close their doors in mid-March because of the coronavirus pandemic. San Diego Zoo Global CEO and President Paul Barabalt says the animals at the two facilities were well cared for during the shutdown.
With our doors closed, we are still having to maintain all of our nutrition services, all of our wildlife care, all of our vet care at 100%.
Barabalt says it cost the zoo more than $200 million a year for that care.
So that's something that depends on gate, that depends on audiences coming in. We've been able to continue through this because of the support we've received through the years.
Barabalt says zoo officials have worked hard to protect people when they return. The zoo will only allow half the crowd they normally have, and Barabalt says it's just the first step. The zoo will reopen in phases, and that means bringing back furloughed workers in phases.
As we open different parts, we will be bringing our staff back. And so it'll be in phases as we go along. As we can see the audience coming back, we'll bring up and return everybody to meet that same demand.
And while the zoo can plan for the crowds to return, it is the crowds returning that will determine whether or not this is a success. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
And that's all for this special edition of KPBS News. For all of us here at KPBS, I'm Maya Trabulsi. Thank you for joining us, and stay safe.